It's the week ending Saturday, the 2nd of September, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen North Korea simulating nuclear strikes on military targets in South Korea, more than 2,000 flights being cancelled due to a UK air traffic control system failure, and the Spanish Football Federation's president, Luis Rubiales, being called to resign after kissing player Jenny Hermoso. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Arian McNichol. Let's unwrap the week. And as Olly is still on holiday, I'm with you for one more week, and joining me today we have three of our finest freelancers from the refugee podcast Integrate That. It's Abdulwahab Tahhan. Fresh from the Camden Fringe, it's comedian Suchandrika Chakrabarti. And from the One Decision podcast, it's Julia Macfarlane. And Julia, I don't think we've spoken since Boris Johnson had his podcasting debut on your show. How was that?
Oh, that was the busiest and most stressful birthday I've ever had in my entire life, matched only by the previous birthday when Boris Johnson's chancellor resigned and his health secretary on the same day. So it's becoming a bit of an annual tradition. But he had the audacity to snore in response to one of my questions about the Chris Pincher affair, which got him some rather unhelpful headlines. But it was memorable to say the least.
Well, as a special birthday present, I've actually asked Suchandrika to be as punchy and prime ministerial as possible, just to make you feel right at home. And actually, Julia, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The Price is Bride in China.
At a casual glance, this verdant and genteel park in central Beijing looks like a popular spot for the elderly. This is Zhongshan Park, and these elderly parkgoers are on a mission to find the perfect spouse for their unmarried adult child.
Loveless in China, why are young Chinese not getting married? A video from CNA Insider released on Tuesday. Julia, what's your story?
So this is it's a news story about the fact that there were 800,000 fewer couples in China tying the knot compared to 2021, which was the last full year that they had on record. And I am obsessed with this story because it speaks to, it's one story part of an issue that is facing so many aging populations. And this is a particularly acute problem in Asia. But we'll get to that in a second, because what is happening in China is amid their increasing economic uncertainty, the fact that they came out recently from an extremely punishing and restrictive lockdown, and the fact that there is growing youth unemployment in China. Young people are really putting off getting married. And it's a problem because China's facing this demographic ticking time bomb. Because if you remember, they had their famous one-child policy trying to curb their hugely ballooning population. And it worked a bit too well, and they started worrying about the impact that this was going to have on their population. So in 2016, the Chinese Communist Party, they abandoned this one-child policy and encouraged women to have up to 3 babies to try and increase the birth rate. And that's not really working because the cost of raising children is among the highest in the world. The marriage rate is very closely sort of aligned with their birth rate. It's very unusual for people to have children in China outside of wedlock, or for single adults to raise children. And so it's facing this growing aging population, which the government is increasingly worrying about what they do about this. So the Chinese government is trying to encourage people to get married. They've started doing things like holding state-sponsored dating events. They've got these programs in a number of cities to try and promote what they call a new era of marriage.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that broader picture, but Abdul, I gather in Changshan, which is a region of China, there's been a particular approach to exactly what Julia is talking about a certain sort of incentivization this week. What's that?
So a very small town, in a pretty much obscure town in China, where the population is a little bit over 300,000, considered pretty much nothing in China. There's kind of to encourage people to get married. They kind of issued this new reward for brides if they get married under the age of 25. If the bride is under the age of 25, the couple get a thousand renminbi, which is around a little bit over £100. But there are, of course, conditions they have to meet. The bride has to be 25 or under. The bride and should be from that province. The bride or the groom have to register to live there. So these are the conditions that they have to fulfill in order to get this 1,000. It's really nothing. 1,000 renminbi in China is not like a kind of something you would do to get 1,000. It's not like I want to get married to get this 1,000. It wouldn't do you anything. You would spend it on a night out. So it's really nothing. But it is really very interesting to see that news in the Guardian. And then I talked to my Chinese friends and students, and we started googling this small town, and a lot of them didn't even hear about it until we found it on a tiny spot in China.
So yeah, I like what Abdul just said about that's how much you could spend on a night out, because why can't it be both? It could be a great night out. Surprise, you're married. Like, I can see that as a movie. I mean, it's really interesting that a lot of the conditions are on the bride, and on a really young age of 25. I mean, very generally speaking, you don't really have to worry that much about female fertility at that age. So why 25? And how does this work with China being such a kind of economic powerhouse, because it's also taking particularly quite a lot of women out of the workforce, depending on how they're going to divide up the labour and how they divide up the childcare. It's taking a lot of women out of the workforce when they're starting to build their careers and their salaries, and so it seems like a really odd move. I guess it's not surprising it's happening in a small place. It could be an area that people leave to go and find work opportunities in the big city. It strikes me that you would only bring this in a place that's having that situation, a bit of a brain drain. But it seems very specific, very centered on what women are doing.
I mean, this is a broad question. Suchandrika was talking about it being kind of a female issue, which unquestionably it obviously is. But Julia, I mean, it seems as though the desire to get married young is dissipating generally across genders, across the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is globally, there are really tough economic conditions. There is job insecurity, and these are all things that are very acute in China, particularly given what is happening with the Chinese economy. But I think what Suchandrika was saying, her observations about how these sort of incentives seem to be largely geared at the women, I think is so interesting and really, really telling, because remember, China has had that one-child policy for years and years and years, and what that resulted in is hundreds of thousands of families choosing to only have a boy, because if they could only have one child, they would have a boy. And down the line, decades later, what that has led to has been a surplus of unmarried men and not enough women. And because of that cultural preference for boys during the government's one-child policy, which ended, as I said, back in 2016, China now has around 35 million more men than women, which is really sort of fueling the sense of economic competition for marriage. They say that given that they are competing against more men, there is a lot of financial insecurity. A lot of men feel like they're not paid enough, or they don't have enough to offer women in order to convince them to get married. And then when you look at the women's point of view, the women are also concerned about their job security. The Chinese government has been cracking down on a lot of private companies, which has resulted in huge layoffs and redundancies. A lot of young women are concerned about their careers because it's still a very traditional society where most childbearing responsibilities fall to the women. So women in China are increasingly putting off getting married and having babies until they sort out their career. And I think that's something that you also are increasingly seeing in a lot of Western countries.
Yeah, I mean, some people say that the world is overpopulated as it is. China is obviously contributing an enormous amount to that, being one of the most populous places on Earth. And consequently, the people who think this go on that a reduction in birth rates is a good thing. Abdul, is that the case or is that not the case?
It is the case if you don't really want to have children. And a lot of people like Gen Z or I don't know, millennials don't really want to have children. I don't want to have children. I've made this decision very clear, and my family cannot really comprehend it. My mom was like, I've never met any guy who doesn't want to have children. I said, yes, because you're 70. You're not 20 or 30 years old. We've discussed this with my students at university, and pretty much very few of them wanted to have children because their parents want to have children. So wanting to have children is not something a lot of young people would want to do. And if you look at, I mean, a couple of years ago, I think like 10 years or 15 years ago, vasectomy was something I think a lot of people didn't even hear about. You talk about vasectomy now, say, yeah, it's available. I think you can do it in the NHS, and there's a long queue for it. Guys cannot wait really to wait in line to get it. So it's a lot of people don't want it, but is that good for the economy? I'm not really sure. I mean, there's still a lot of countries that have very cheap labor, such as India, such as China. Southeast Asia is full of sweatshops and factories that have a lot of cheap labors. So do we really need more children to help up our economies, to make us our phones? Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm afraid that's about my own level of commitment to this segment. So, Abdul, you're up next after this. All right, Abdul, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Tennis is not rocket science.
This is his moment of destiny, receiving the trophy for the 23rd time, a Grand Slam trophy. And he's third here at Roland Garros. He just seems unbeatable now in the slams. 23, but is he going to stop at 23? It really doesn't seem likely.
Djokovic celebrating his 23rd Grand Slam title, a clip from Eurosport Tennis released back in June. Abdul, what's the story?
The greatest player of all times, Djokovic, starts his campaign to become the number one rank in tennis in the US this week. But the story is not about how he plays. The story is about what he's wearing. In the French Open, he was spotted in the French Open and in Wimbledon. He was spotted wearing a metallic disc strapped to his chest. Started people asking a lot of sort of questions. It looked like the same thing that Iron Man was wearing on his chest, which is a device to prevent bullets from going through his body. So when he was asked about this device, he joked about it and said, "Yeah, because I like Iron Man," but it's not really anything to do with Iron Man. This device is called Tau Patch, and what it is, it's a disc that has 2 nanocrystal layers. According to the Tau technology company that's behind this product, it's alleged to help the wearer organize sleep, reduce anxiety, and regulate body temperature by converting heat into light. So this device is available for public for anyone to buy. It costs around £240, and the company claims it helps with a lot of diseases. But this is all what the company alleges. Some doctors would disagree with that.
So, Suchandrika, it's called a Tau patch, Tau being the ancient Chinese wisdom. There's some acupuncture element, I gather. It's also got this nanotechnology and laser therapeutic aspect to it. You can see how it's been devised to appeal to a range of different medical approaches and ideas. But, which is it and what is it actually doing for people?
Good Lord. I love that he's into crystals now. I know they're nanocrystals, that makes them tech. Is it astrology next for him? It could be anything. Love it. So what is it actually, how does it actually work? The inventor of the Tau Patch and the CEO of Tau Technologies, Fabio Fontana, he became dependent on painkillers after a car accident, and after his treatment, he was inspired to come up with this product. So he said that all the therapies he tried only had temporary results. A doctor in Rome tried laser treatments on him, and they helped relieve the tension in the muscles of his neck and back, but that only lasted a week. So that sounds like something that a tennis player at Djokovic's level could do with. Imagine the muscle strain, the pain, the tension, the amount of training he goes through, and the recovery after he wins a big event. Then the nanocrystals, which I just love, they're a way of administering light therapy Don't know what light therapy does.
It works. Trust us. We won't explain how, but trust us, it works.
Yeah, it definitely works. And then, I mean, the biggest kind of giveaway is that the tennis authorities, the ATP Tour, the International Tennis Federation, have not commented on its use and they have not banned it. So that probably means it's a placebo.
Yeah, I mean, let's park for a second its efficacy and just come to the question, Julia, presupposing it does work, presupposing it does do something, does it not in some way take away from Djokovic's own achievements and skills if he is using a performance-enhancing technology?
Well, this is exactly what he said. When he was asked about this in the press conference, he said, my team delivers an incredibly efficient nanotech to help me deliver my best on court. It's the biggest secret of my career. And if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. So that's from his own admission that the only reason he's sitting there with all these wins is because of all these nanocrystals. And I'm just, like Suchandrika, I'm so obsessed with it. Does he charge his nanotech under the light of the moon once a month with sage? I mean, I don't know. But I think it's really interesting because the story has come up around the same time that Meghan Markle was photographed with a Nucalm biosignal processing disc, which was a little stress patch thing on her wrist. And that is also nanotechnology. And that, I mean, I looked this up. It's a different company called Nucalm, and that works using nanoacoustics. And because everything is, vibrational, and so it sends tiny little micro vibrations in order to recover, restore, reboot, and rebalance, tuning the human body like fine-tuning a musical instrument. And I think what is so interesting about all these celebrities advocating this unsubstantiated alternative medicine woo-woo, according to some other more disparaging sort of takes on this kind of stuff, is I think it's sort of linked to a wider movement that is quite interestingly exploding after the pandemic, which is a sort of a rejection of the medical mainstream, and how you are increasingly seeing alternative sort of wellness also wrapped up in things like anti-vaxxers, but also just a rejection of the establishment. And you go on into, you find the fringes of wider conspiracy theories. And it's such an interesting story, and I think tells us so much about how societies are sort of responding to the rise of tech, the rise of, governments increasingly creeping into all corners of our lives with things like lockdown and sort of mandating us to take vaccines and things. And it's a backlash. And there are people who are retreating back into sort of ancient wisdom and going back to Chinese medicine and things like that. And it is interesting that there are all these celebrity sort of, ambassadors for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's fairly clear that the four of us at least have, shall we say, a degree of skepticism about this product in particular, but none of us are scientists. Abdul, what has the actual scientific community said about this, and how have they reacted to Taupatch's broader claims?
Yeah, in an article for Science-Based Medicine, Dr. Harriet Hall says that there's no credible data to support these alleged benefits of this tau disc, and there's a little benefit to it. Another professor at Exeter University, Edzard Ernest, told Sky News that none of these claims are supported by sound evidence. But hey, look, if this works for you psychologically, as Suchandrika said, it's placebo. If it works for you, it's all mental. I mean, if you watch Djokovic, he never loses any break serve at all. He wins them all, and this is all it's all in here. It's all mental.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a big part of that is technology. The people achieve because they've got great training regimes as well as the obvious talent. And they also have tech. I mean, Taupatch isn't cheap, Julia. I mean, if this does work, or even if it doesn't, does technology and the sort of the race towards sporting technology just make sport increasingly elitist in the first place?
I mean, I think that's such an interesting question. I still haven't watched, is it the Icarus project? That's all about the Russian doping scandal. My partner Ben keeps haranguing me to watch it and says it's fascinating. But I think that's true because there is so much intervention in sport. There is so much doping in sport, but it's all done to a sort of a set maximum level as deemed acceptable by the authorities. And so you can't, if you are, a junior athlete trying to break into the big guys, you have to also keep up with all of these other players who are receiving so much more help, technological, sort of social, and so much other than just honing your own physical sport. And I do think it sort of takes away from what the human body itself can achieve. I mean, I'm sure people argue that assistance in the form of, the most high-tech gear, sort of medical intervention, or acceptable levels of sort of doping and medication can allow us to see how far the human body can go. But you're right, it just becomes so interwoven that we sort of lose what it means to have this human achievement. And what happens when mods become more biological, and you're already getting biohackers and things like that. I mean, is that the future of sport? Are we going to see this line become grayer and grayer as we start wearing more? People who are not athletes already use technology to better themselves biologically. I recently took part in the Zoe app, which is involved having a sort of blood glucose monitoring thing to try and work out what is the best kind of food for myself. And that was really, really fascinating. But that was me going around with a bit of tech, literally, stuck into my flesh for 2 weeks. And, this kind of thing is becoming more and more mainstream. And so sport and the rules governing sport are going to evolve with our habits. And so are we going to see the future of athleticism and sport involving cyborgs, involving humans who have all these sort of modular sort of things enhancing their performances? It's a classic thin edge of the wedge argument, but you're right. I think it does sort of take something out of just the humanity of our achievements in themselves, outside of the influence of tech and all of these extra little things that make us run that further mile.
Okay, so Suchandrika, you're up next after this. Okay, so Suchandrika, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
So it's true, laughter is the best. Well, it might be quite a good medicine.
Laughter is a social emotion, so we're 30 times more likely to laugh if there is somebody else with us than if we're on our own. And we'll laugh more if we know those people, and we'll laugh more if we like those people.
Why laughter really is the best medicine, a BBC Ideas video released back in May. Suchandrika, what's the story?
So there have been lots of studies around laughter and how it can actually physically help us. But there's a study this week that was presented at the annual meeting of the European Society of Cardiology in Amsterdam, which feels like that is a step up, like that's quite serious to take it to people like that. So this study has demonstrated that laughing causes the tissue inside the heart to expand, which increases oxygen flow around the body. Now that could be really good news for people who have got heart disease, who've got trouble with their hearts. So patients with coronary artery disease, which is becoming, much more common in aging populations, they engaged in a course of laughter therapy that then reduced inflammation and saw them in better health, said this research. So a bit more info on the study. It is by Professor Marco Saffi of the Hospital de Clínicas de Porto Alegre in Brazil. And he said that the study found that laughter therapy increased the functional capacity of the cardiovascular system, which means that over the medium and long term, this can really help patients with cardiovascular disease. And it's the first of its kind study to examine if laughter therapy can improve symptoms of patients with such diseases.
It's almost quite funny to have humour being taken so seriously, trying to generate a humorous response in such a laboratory type setting. But Abdul, how was the study actually conducted?
Well, the study was conducted by dividing participants into two groups. There were overall 26 participants, aging 42 and below. One group would watch comedy for 2 hours a week, being it a sitcom, being stand-up comedy or whatever, and the other group would watch documentary series or the Amazon forest. I don't know why watching the Amazon was considered not funny. I mean, you can watch a lot of funny things about it. Anyway, so and they found out that after these 2 weeks, that the group with who watched comedy, they they provided better test results than the other group. But you have to bear in mind that this is a very, very tiny, small study. Only 26 people in a very controlled and small, I don't know, place where they had to go through this. So we need a bigger study on a bigger scale elsewhere to replicate the same data to think that, okay, laughing actually works.
Yeah, you almost wonder whether an inverse conclusion could be drawn that, the other group proved that news, and particularly news about politics and the Amazon, could actually be damaging for our health. But I mean, Julia, does this indicate that we may come to see laughter being offered as a therapy or a treatment?
There have been different variations of this kind of study happening so regularly over the last 10 years. And it's sort of, studies looking into the benefits of laughter for improving depression, for improving chronic pain, improving anxiety, and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of these studies do recommend the prescription of laughter therapy. But I was thinking about this. I love comedies. I love watching comedies. Things like Schitt's Creek. We watched Schitt's Creek during the first lockdown, and it really got us through the lockdown. It was such a lovely, light-hearted, easy watch that definitely lifted our spirits during such a grim and fearful time. But when I was reading about this story, I was just thinking all the times where I've had the most sort of vigorous laughter, which is what I think the study is talking about, is when the laughter is it says mirthful and very sort of a physical, when you are caught with the giggles and you're laughing really hard, it is quite exhausting. It is, you run out of breath, and it is quite a physical sort of thing to do. My biggest laughter never comes from watching TV. The times I've had the most sort of vigorous laughter has been from laughing with or mostly at my family or my loved ones. If you really want to have the true benefits of laughter, you need to find funnier family members or funnier friends, because I think that's sort of maximizing the amount of health benefits that you can get from this.
I mean, that does bring us to a sort of esoteric question, I guess. What Julia finds funny, some other person may not find so funny. Suchandrika, why do we actually laugh, and do other animals do it?
As Julie mentions, you can laugh only so long and in a certain way at a TV show or something that isn't interactive. So laughter is really social, has a social function, which I think only works to a certain extent when it's happening on a screen. We are 30 times more likely to laugh in a group. Young children between the ages of 2.5 and 4 were 8 times more likely to laugh at a cartoon when they watched it with another child. So yes, in terms of how laughter achieves these amazing sort of results inside our bodies, according to the Mayo Clinic, there are a lot of physical health benefits of laughter. So it increases your oxygen intake, which can stimulate your heart, lungs, and muscles. It releases endorphins. Now, this feels like the big one to me. These are feel-good chemicals that make us feel happy. They can relieve stress and pain. The act of increasing and then decreasing our heart rate and our blood pressure through laughter, which is kind of what Julie was saying when she was with that very physical, almost when your stomach hurts when you're laughing that much, which all of us, we don't feel enough as an adult or do every day as an adult, but as a child remember doing that. That's ultimately a way of relieving tension. So it kind of builds your body up a bit like a sneeze, but obviously much more fun, and then that release, and we ultimately feel better. And it can even boost our immune system because it releases stress and illness reducing neuropeptides. So there's actually lots of chemical reactions happening in the body as a result of laughing.
Right. So if laughter does have these actual chemical effects, Abdul, is this not yet more evidence that not every physical ailment needs to be treated with drugs?
Maybe not, and no one can deny that laughter is good for you. But how good is it? Is the result of this study outstretched? Totally, for a couple of reasons. Number one, a lot of comedians, stand-up comedians, are depressed. One of them is Jim Jeffries, the Australian guy who talks about his depression a lot. If you, there was an article, I think 10 years ago, I remember reading it back in when I first arrived in the UK. I was looking into stand-up comedy coming from war in Syria, and it says that LA Comedy Club hired a psychologist to work with the comedians, in-house psychologist to work with the comedians. And then before I became citizen, a couple of like months of becoming a citizen, I was preparing to become a British citizen, and I had to take life in the UK test to become a citizen. And in it says to become British citizen, British people have the ability to laugh at ourselves, and this is one of the characters of being a UK citizen. So I decided to do stand-up comedy back then, and to laugh at war and myself. So there is power to it when you're the one telling the jokes. Yes, it's good for you to laugh and take things, lightly, but is it really gonna cure anything? I don't think so.
I just have to jump in here, Abdul, because I really have to pay tribute to the Syrian resilience that I saw during the war. And I'm sure you're familiar with those Homsy humor videos from people in the city of Homs. And they made all these videos taking the mickey out of the Assad regime, who claimed that they were like hiding weapons of mass destruction. And so they filmed these videos on YouTube with things like pomegranate grenade belts and those magazine belts made of bananas and things. They're like, yeah, look, these are our weapons of mass destruction that we have here in Homs. And they would release a lot of these videos that were humorous in the middle of being bombed by the government. And it just showed incredible sort of mental fortitude. And those videos were things that I will never forget, sort of the strength of the Syrian people and those special people in the city of Homs I just had to mention.
Julia, I always say we don't have oil, but we have olive oil. That's even better.
I know which one I'd rather have.
I mean, all of this must be a little bit music to your ears, both Abdul and Suchandrika. I mean, does this make you both health workers as well? Is this a shortcut to a medical degree?
Well, one thing I'll say, with speaking to what Abdul said about the size of the group, he's completely right that it's a really tiny sample size. 26 people with an average of age of 64 in this recent study. And then I look back through Google, which basically goes back to about 2003 or 4. And look, obviously, this news comes up every couple of years. Laughter will save us. It will make you feel better. So found a piece called "It Helps Even If You Fake It" from the Washington Post, March 30th, 2003, by a guy called Richard Morin. He opens with, and this is hilarious, "The news is grim these days. We could all use a good laugh. In 2003. Oh, love him. The next 20 years, he was not ready for that. Right. But then there's a study about kind of people faking laughter, and it's based on 17 sort of college students. So again, these samples are really tiny. And one thing I do say kind of straight face is that I don't think medical research is taking this very seriously at all. I imagine it's very hard to get these kind of trials through, and that's why they're staying so small. And that's why we can kind of write them off. But they're now being shown to like meetings of cardiologists, which is kind of a big deal. You don't want to waste their time. They've got a lot to do. So if they can convince the people who run these trials to get them bigger sample sizes, to give them more space to do this, maybe we'll find something really interesting about the ways our body tries to heal itself, not on its own, through connection, through laughter, through connecting with other people. And maybe that would change social policy, the way we deal with the elderly, how we work as a society, because we seem to be moving towards atomization and being on our own, and we know that's not healthy. We know we need to move back the other way. So maybe this can be really important, but there needs to be a convincing job within the medical research community of, well, let's have 200 people, let's have something statistically significant. So I agree, at the moment, these are kind of like fun and funny stories, because 17, 26, that's not enough.
Well, as we await the results of further research, this has all certainly been very therapeutic for me. But for now, my thanks to Julia, Suchandrika, and Abdul. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped, wherever you get your podcasts, and tapping follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription. Just go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Arian McNichol. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer, Sophie Sophie King at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.